This is Still Enrolled.
And welcome on into the latest edition of Still Enrolled, a Big Ten football podcast. As always, Ryan Hickey and Brian Tripp with you here off of a quick little 1 week sabbatical, if you will. We are coming in rip-roaring, ready to go here with a loaded podcast show. As you could imagine, we have the NFL Combine underway here. We're going to get into the Big Ten participation in that here as well. We have some college football playoff changes, not just for 2026 and beyond, but maybe for 2025 next season. We'll tell you about that as well. And one team, Trip, is dominating the recruiting trail early on here for the next cycle. Is it real? Is it not? Is there reason to believe in one superpower that maybe has been dormant now for a while? We'll get into that here as well. But Trip, man, I missed you last week. How we doing?
I'm doing better than you were last week, I think. What, you had the flu? You're not a vaccine guy? You didn't get the flu shot? I'll stay away from that topic here on the Still podcast. But it is great to be back and great to be talking college football. Yeah, NFL Combine, a lot of news. Kind of still waiting to see exactly where this shakes out between the Big Ten, SEC. I think you and I both have an idea, and we're in agreement as to where it's heading. And then, can I play spoiler on that team you talked about that's hot? We've talked so much about them. We've talked so much about USC. We'll dive back into that. And then I know next week we'll have to get into, again, the conversation about spring games, the value of spring games, and that list of schools that keeps canceling spring games continues to grow and evolve week after week. But it is great to be back here on the pod, and I'm glad you are feeling better after being down and out with the flu.
Fever, chills, headaches. It was, this time last week, it was a mess. So, not good at all, to say the least.
It's that time of year because I taught my news writing class at Penn State this morning. And, I'm not saying I'm one of those germaphobe guys and I needed some sort of protective barrier between me and the students. But after what they had here last weekend and Thon weekend, which is a really cool thing at Penn State, and raised nearly $18 million for childhood cancer awareness, but they're up all weekend and in tight and closed spaces. And every time I stop talking, or even while I was talking, all I hear is, I'm just like, please. I thought I was getting it in the beginning of the week, maybe not to the extent you had, but this is going to really make me sound probably old here. But last night I moved my humidifier in my room right next to my bed instead of kind of in the corner. I'll tell you what, I've been hydrating with my Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl Yeti.
Nice.
and with my humidifier last night. Fingers crossed. I think we might come out of this thing okay, but it's great to be back here on the pod now that we've kind of done our health and wellness update for the day.
Yes, and hopefully you listening, you watching, stay strong out there. Get your vitamins, get your emergency in, and stay away from the sickies.
Do you take airborne emergency? Like what vitamin C?
Emergency.
What kind of do you do emergency? Okay.
I'm an emergency kind of guy. What about yourself?
Yeah,
I'm
airborne emergency. It's all the same. It's all the same
That's
stuff.
true.
Someone tried to get me to do like a fish oil the other day. But I'm not a sushi guy. I'm just afraid I'm going to taste it. And that's a whole nother
Those
discussion.
pills are big. Those fish oil pills are too big for me. That's for sure. Yeah. Well, I guess we don't have to worry about that in Indy. Well, I guess maybe we should worry about that in Indy. A lot of people in very enclosed spaces here as well, as the Combine is well underway. Well, I tripped the Big Ten. Pretty well represented.
I was going to say, I didn't mean to cut you off, but when I was there for the Big Ten football championship game, the air circulation in Lucas Oil Stadium is fine.
Okay.
Anyway.
Good. Dome, true. Man.
This is off the rails to start. You can tell that it's been a little while since we did a podcast together. Anyway, the NFL Combine, the Big Ten this year, and you look Big Ten SEC, right? That's all we ever talk about. There's 105 players from the 14 of the 16 SEC members participating in the Combine. For the Big Ten, 79 of the 329 players are Big Ten, and the most of any school in the entire country. Ohio State, 15 players participating in the NFL Combine. Oregon has a dozen, and Michigan has 8.
Wow. Yeah, Ohio State, I mean, look, it makes sense. All those seniors and high-level talent they brought back last year, that they're all in Indy right now. I was going to say working out, but most of them are not working out. They're there for interviews, and that's about it. So we're not going to see much, right? A lot of the top guys, especially in the Big Ten, are not going to be working out, not going to be lighting up, I guess, the radar guns or the whatever position that they're doing, all these meaningless drills that I think, whatever. I can go on a whole tangent.
No, go ahead. No, go ahead. Talk about the combine.
I hate the combine.
I hate the combine. The underwear Olympics here.
I think it's the most, I think the interviews are important, and sure, if you want to get the medicals, whatever, but I think so much that comes out of it is so stupid about which quarterbacks throw, who doesn't, and how that should impact their draft stock. And watching guys run routes on air, or watching guys run 40s, and all of a sudden now this guy's rising up the board because he ran faster than we thought. So many of these guys at every school have 2-3 years of tape on them. The fact that now that almost gets thrown out the window because, this guy only ran a 4.4 40, too slow for me, he's off my board. Or remember when DK Metcalf ran apparently one of the worst 3-cone drills in that drill's history? I think DK Metcalf's done okay in the NFL. You know what it is? I hate to be this guy, but this honestly gets me very frustrated. I think there are a lot of wannabe draft analysts out there that go to Indy that want to have this be their time. And, I see this guy up close and he's really good. Or I see this guy up close and he sucks. And it's like you put so much stock into 2 days worth of these guys doing football movements and drills that really don't translate at all to the game. And they want to make sweeping declarations about this guy's rising, this guy's falling. I hate the combine. I really do. It provides some good storylines. And I think the rumors that come out of it, with all the GMs and coaches and reporters in place, I think is fun and exciting. But for actual, when it comes to actual breakdown of prospects, I despise it. And I'm glad more players are, I don't know if you want to call it taking a stand trip. I'm glad more, though, are not working out.
I think the combine and a pro day can be utilized to reinforce any questions or answer any questions, reinforce what you see on tape or answer any questions that you may have about a player. But let's be honest, what a player can do instinctually on tape, how fast they play, game speed. I think a 40 or a cone drill, shuttle run, I can see that, hey, is what I'm seeing matching up with where they are numerically against their peers, right? As long as whether you run a 4.35 or a 4.4, it doesn't change a whole lot. That guy's fast. But if a guy who's projected to run a 4.35 or a 4.4 runs a 4.6 or a 4.7, then all of a sudden, maybe it does lead to what you're seeing on tape, the belief of a player, hey, let's just further investigate this. So I agree with you. I think ultimately the years and years of scouting, what you know on a player, what you see on tape, getting to know a player, the interview process, finding out who they are, what motivates them, what can they bring to a locker room, what do they bring to my program and my culture, my organization. That's all fine and dandy, and you can get that from there. But ultimately, just because a guy, and certainly there have been cases, good and bad, right? A guy tests really well and he ends up being a player and you help discover him, or a guy tests really well and he's a complete flop. I have my Eagles Super Bowl championship banner hanging behind me. Well, they didn't win Super Bowls back in the 90s when they were drafting Mike Mamula, who was an underwear Olympics champion. Ultimately, I think you use it as just another tool in the draft evaluation process, but it cannot be the tool and should not be the tool in the draft evaluation process. So I don't want to completely poo-poo it, but ultimately it's just like a little element of it that's turned into this, just like the draft has, this 5-day television, made for television spectacle, which is why the NFL is so great at what it does, because here we are 2.5 weeks after the Eagles Super Bowl parade, and we're already talking about who's going to be on the team next year and what's going on at this combine. And then that will carry us right into free agency starting in March, which carries us right into the draft, which carries us into OTAs, which carries us right into camp, which the schedule release, and then into the preseason, the Hall of Fame game. The NFL has this whole thing nailed down. It's just another piece of the NFL cog.
No, they have perfected the schedule of 365, always being in the news cycle, always having stuff to talk about, no doubt about it. But like you just heard, we're not talking about combine results. We're not going to break down some guy's 40 time or how they did in the 3-cone drill or the wide receiver gauntlet. But I want to ask you this, Trip, because we did see now, right, a lot more mock drafts coming out. Mel Kiper put out his most recent one, And then he had 4 Big Ten players going in the top 10: Mason Graham, Tyler Warren, Josh Simmons, Abdul Carter, with Abdul going number 1, which would be big for him. And obviously for Penn State, having that could be their first number 1 overall pick since Courtney Brown back in 2000, which would be a nice little feather in James Franklin and Abdul Carter's cap as well here. But they're right. A lot of high-level Big Ten players that will go early in the draft upcoming here. I'm curious, just for 2025, as a rookie, is there a player you're looking at thinking, oh boy, this guy can have a major impact, and whether it's offensive or defensive, be in the rookie of the year discussion? You kind of see one of these guys having a big impact right away?
Carter's interesting, but it's going to be but if he goes to a team like Tennessee, a decent defensive team struggled offensively, how much impact or notoriety does he get on a team that has that's probably going to struggle as good as Carter probably will be in his rookie season? For me, I start to go down the board a little bit more and look at the impact that Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean had this year for Philadelphia. And you kind of get added somewhere in the late teens, early 20s as a cornerback. And, as a round 1 corner, you're probably going to be asked to play day 1. You'll be playing day 1 on a competitor. And I think you know where I'm going here. I think Will Johnson from Michigan could be a guy who hits the scene right away on a competitive team. All of a sudden is one of the missing pieces to a team that helps them compete for maybe a conference championship or a Super Bowl. So as good as I think Carter will be or a Warren will be, I'm going Will Johnson here a little bit further down that list of players and look, you're never going to pick an offensive lineman. You're not going to pick Connerly from Oregon. You're not going to pick Simmons from Ohio State. But I'm going to go Will Johnson as a guy that could be the most impactful Big Ten rookie in the NFL next year.
I like that. And kind of what you said about Abdul Carter, feel the same about Mason Graham, who, again, is just another physical freak. But again, if you're going 4 or 5, depending on your landing spot, and you're kind of the only guy defenses have to worry about in the defensive line, I think it does make it more difficult for you to have a quick impact versus going to a team further down in the top 10 or top 15 where there are some players around you that can maybe help take some pressure off. That's why I kind of look at Tyler Warren of Penn State, just because, number one, I think that's a guy, depending on, again, where he goes, he'll be drafted on a team that needs some instant offense. I think that maybe already has a quarterback established, but it can use some versatility. And that word just right there, versatility, where he can block, he can line up inside, he can line up outside, he can line up in the backfield. Hell, he could take the snap if he wants to. Yeah. I think he's such a unique player, Trip, that it almost kind of forces teams that have creative coaches to be able to get him, right? Like, I think, there's been a popular mock draft landing spot of him going to Denver or Indianapolis. I think 2 creative head coaches in Shane Steichen and Sean Payton, respectively, that I think could get the most out of him. It does, I think, depend where he lands, for sure, and the creativity they have on offense and who the quarterback is in terms of immediate impact in 2025. But that's a guy that could be a good Swiss Army knife here for a bunch of teams drafting in the top 10, top 15, top 20. I think Tyler Moore could have a quick impact here right away next year.
And it's been interesting to hear this debate and kind of see some of the buzz on social media and the chatter of, well, Tyler Warren versus Colston Loveland from Michigan. And Loveland coming out of an offense that didn't throw the ball this year. And he had some injury problems here in his 2025 season. And people know what he did last year playing with J.J. McCarthy in the Michigan offense that went and won the national championship. I think Loveland is another guy in this class that could have an immediate impact. I've kind of seen the debate like, well, is he a better true fit at a tight end than a Warren? Warren's got that versatility, Swiss Army knife, can not only take the snap, throw the ball, he can snap it himself. Look, Penn State's entire offense was built around the running backs and Warren this year. So I don't know that I buy that, Loveland's a better pass catching tight end. Warren's a guy that they built their entire offense around. Never did Michigan build their entire offense around Colston Loveland. But that's not to discredit how good he is. That's another guy where you think of like the TJ Hawkinson model, a Big Ten tight end, Sam Laporta, Big Ten tight end, and what they could do at that next level, particularly if he goes in that range that you're talking about, 15, 20, 25, that could have an immediate impact of Big Ten guys.
And I think the Combine 2 Trip is a great reminder just of the talent that this conference has. Because, again, we're talking about 4 guys maybe going in the top 10 from the Big Ten. And like you said, with Simmons, there are so many high-level players that maybe aren't playing marquee positions to where we could have a conversation about them being, the most impactful rookie next year in 2025. But all through the first round, all through the draft, really, I think you'll be hearing a lot of Big Ten names and a lot of Big Ten schools represented here over the next few weeks and months as really the draft and the mock drafts come to the forefront. And just, again, highlights, it used to be kind of the SEC, right? It was the premier conference when it comes to all the guys drafted and the most pro-ready guys. And now you're seeing, whether it's the numbers you just listed before about the number of SEC versus Big Ten players at the combine, and I think the number of players you'll see taken in the first 2 days of the draft, a lot of high level talents all across this conference.
And most of them, certainly Oregon with that group and Connerly, the tackle that we talked about, but most of them still Penn State, Ohio State, Michigan. The first round guys this year are those Big Ten blue bloods that we've seen year after year producing players that go in the first round, go really early in NFL drafts, and that are high impact players when they get to the next level. So it's not just because Oregon, SC, UCLA, and Washington have joined the fold. Certainly helps the Big Ten numbers the same way Oklahoma and Texas help the SEC numbers. But it's still this year's class, at least, very much Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State. With Ohio State, the high quantity of guys, also quality, but the high quantity of guys that returned for their national championship team. And now are like, okay, a Jack Sawyer, JTT, now I'm going to go take my talents to the next level.
And the last thing I'll say, it's funny, right? We talked a lot about different positions and players. The one position we didn't really talk about was quarterback, which is obviously, right, the one that gets the most attention. And that's where, too, as you look at this process over the next few weeks and months, it's like, I'm fascinated to see how Dylan Gabriel is viewed and Will Howard is viewed. Two guys that are veterans, right, that played a lot of football. And you see how, Bo Nix, let's say, came in and had success right away, going to a good landing spot, fitting the system with what Sean Payton has to do. I think really blowing a lot of people away with how quickly he was able to step right in and lead the Broncos to the playoffs in year number one. Look, I mean, obviously Chip Kelly, right, going to Vegas, maybe that could be a popular landing spot for Will Howard, maybe day 2, early day 3, something like that. Like, I don't know. I don't think any of these quarterbacks in the Big Ten will have immediate impacts or big impacts or will be day 1 or day 2 picks. But it is one where, like, you look at the model, right, of recent success, Jaden Daniels, Bo Nix, guys that play a lot of football. And those two quarterbacks, specifically in Howard and Gabriel, have played a lot of football, played a lot of winning football here as well. That's what another storyline, again, as we kind of get into the real draft process here and as we get to their pro days and stuff like that, and you start to see mock drafts go beyond just the first round. Fascinating to see kind of where they go, because those are interesting guys, to say the least here. Obviously the most important position.
And it's kind of fascinating because we talked about Gabriel at length, especially after the Big Ten championship game and having seen him in person out there and then going into the Rose Bowl against Ohio State. And look, he holds basically every record there is for career touchdowns passing because of how long and how successful a career he had at the collegiate level. Howard at 6'4", to me, as good and efficient and as effective and as accurate as Gabriel was, plus the threat of his legs, Howard to me at 6'4" is a really intriguing prospect, like really, really intriguing prospect. And I think that's the biggest difference between Gabriel and Nix. Nix has a little more size to him. And look, the NFL's changed. You don't need to be a 6'4" passer anymore in the NFL. We've seen it from different players, but just how does Howard project at the next level, to me, is a very fascinating storyline going into the NFL draft. So I think you hit the nail on the head right there.
Be fun to see. So we got plenty of more time here to talk about some former Big Ten players and where they do line up in the draft. But kind of also too, right, we talk a lot about these Big Ten players now when it comes to the draft, and a lot of them being, projected to go high. It shows the might and the strength of the conference. And then I don't think it's really an accident now that you're starting to see the Big Ten, along with the SEC, right, flex their muscles when it comes to the direction of the sport. Last week, right, there was a lot of chatter and reports about the new playoff format in 2026 and beyond, as the Big Ten and the SEC basically have all the power to make whatever changes they want. There were another set of meetings on Tuesday out in Dallas, and that really was about not only kind of future playoff plans, but also possible changes to the format here in 2025, where the big discussion for next year trip is, how do you do the buys? Is it the top 4 ranked teams just based on the committee's rankings, or should it still be the conference champions, the 4 highest ranked conference champions, get those 4 buys like we saw in 2024? Do you, like, as we're kind of sitting here talking, and this is kind of now coming to the forefront, just by the way, for 2020, for any changes for this upcoming year only, it has to be unanimous. So all 10 conference commissioners plus Notre Dame's AD. So 11 people have to be in agreement. This is what we're doing. No unanimous vote, no changes to the format here in 2025. When you kind of see that debate, we'll start here first just for 2025, then expand it out. How do you think the format should play out here? Do you think any changes are necessary after seeing the first year of the 12-team playoff?
How do I think it will, or how should it? I don't think, because
should.
it has to be that unanimous decision. I don't think it will happen for 2025, really the last year that all the parties at the table have any power, based on where it's going in 2026 and what we're about to talk about with the Big Ten and the SEC and the format and the expansion of the playoff. I think we talked about it when evaluating this year's college football playoff. You would have better games, better matchups, better TV ratings ultimately if the top 4 teams all had buys. And it probably helps ensure you have the best 4 teams left at the end of a playoff run. But I'm not sure it does, right? Because maybe not having that bye is beneficial. I mean, the teams that were left at the end all were teams that played. Ohio State, Texas, Penn State, Notre Dame all played. They were teams 5 through 8 in the college football playoff rankings. 1 through 4, particularly the top 2 who had outstanding seasons, Georgia and Oregon, were left watching the semifinals at home at the end of the day. I think the 12 team is interesting because, yes, I truly believe having the best 4 get the buys is what's best for the opening round games. There's no doubt if you had an Indiana SMU or a Boise Clemson matchup, those games are probably a whole lot better than what we ended up with in the opening round of the college football playoff. That said, if you are a top 4 team, after watching it play out this year, do you actually want one of the buys? And that's that debate you and I had leading up to it. Like, no, you want to buy. No, you want to buy. Like, it's one less game against a really good team. But then after watching it unfold, I don't know if you do. And that probably gets answered with a 14 and 16 team playoff and the wear and tear and the health. Like, I get all those factors that go into it. I don't think it will change for 2025. I do think you want to have the best 4 for the sustainability of the format. You can't afford to have blowout after blowout after blowout in the opening weekend, or else why do you keep expanding it? You should actually be shrinking the field. However, I do say that with the caveat of a bye might not be the best thing for your college football team in the hopes of reaching a national championship.
I think also too, simplicity helps. Like, I don't know. I really don't know how many just like general college football fans felt this way, but I did think it was a little convoluted when you're watching the rankings release every week and you're seeing Boise State come in at like 10 or 12 or 14, but then here they are sitting there at the 3. Like, I do like, honestly, as dumb as it sounds, I do think simplicity sometimes in the sense of these 4 teams are the top 4 teams. They have the buys 5 through 12. Here's how they're ranked. Here's how they're going to like. I do think sometimes just making it a straight ranking, one at least for 2025 only, 1 through 12, top 4 get the bye, 5 plays 12, 6 plays 11, etc. Let's just go from here. I think that's the easiest way. I liked the fact, I will say, about making conference championships important. Like, I still think you can make it an automatic bye or automatic qualifier, I should say. Hey, if you win your conference, you're in. I have no problem with that. But I think when it comes down to the seeding part, 1 through 4. And I get, like, last year, if that, it played out the way it was supposed to, the 2 teams in the Big Ten and the 2 teams in the SEC title game would have gotten buys. So you could argue those games were irrelevant. The Big Ten and SEC title game, whether you win or not, who cares? Because you're going to get a bye anyway. Okay. Like, I think that's just it happened to be the case that year. It's not going to be like that every year. Also, by the way, it's not going to be the case every year where if you're Oregon, you're facing arguably the most talented team in the playoff in your first game anyway. Like, I think it's also important to remember, if Ohio State just beats Michigan as a 3-touchdown favorite at home, we're not talking about Ohio State and Oregon playing in the quarterfinals and Oregon getting quote unquote screwed and Penn State's path being a lot easier. Like, a random result happened that I don't think of. Like, if you just say, okay, this is the format for 10 years, I bet you 9 out of 10 years that exact scenario does not happen. It just happened to be the one year that we do it. It happens, but I don't think you have to like I still think at this point the bye is important, even though the 4 teams of the bye went 0 for 4. I think you can also chalk that up to outside of Oregon, Ohio State, the other 3 teams for the most part were less talented and or banged up when they faced their quarterfinal team. Georgia didn't have their quarterback, and Boise State and Arizona State played better teams.
No, we could ultimately have this discussion for hours because ultimately for me, it comes down to, well, what's the value of the conference championship model? And obviously we presented and talked about, I think on the last podcast, how now the Big Ten has said, and the SEC have said, well, maybe we have a championship weekend. 1 plays 2, 3 plays 4, 5 plays 6. How does that then factor into where you rank teams going into a college football playoff? We know the reasons for it, right? It's because it's more games, more revenue, and more TV dollars. That's ultimately why they're doing it. Whatever this format is for 2025 is going to be a 1-year thing, because in 2026, whether it's that proposal and where that goes, an expanded playoff, what's a conference championship game weekend look like, if it even exists, it's all getting blown up after this. I think I agree with you. I think I agree with you in that, yes, the buys still do matter, even though this year's small sample size may tell us otherwise. Because I truly believe it's such a long season. Here's the thing. If Ohio State needed to play a game after playing Michigan before going into the Rose Bowl, and it so happened it was at home against Tennessee. I don't think everything happens for a rhyme, reason. Like, that's just the story, the narrative, how your season comes together. I'll keep it short. Ultimately, yes, I believe the buys still are beneficial. I can see why you wouldn't want a buy, but ultimately in a long season, playing less games with the wear and tear on the body and not having the risk of going against a really good football team, which is a top 10, top 15 football team, not having that risk of playing the game and losing it is still better than, like, to advance to the round of 8 is better than being in the round of 12. That said, I do believe, I know you're kind of like, well, it's 1 year. Let's see. I think the Big Ten and SEC have so much shown their superiority that it's not fair. And now maybe a Big 12 team, or maybe a Notre Dame is worthy of a top 4 seed and a bye. So I would not like to see it. Okay, just the 2 best Big Ten, the 2 best SEC are guaranteed, or maybe an ACC team. But so I would like it to just see the top 4 get a bye, the other 8 play. That's my hope for 2025.
I agree. And like you said, hope is the key word, because like we just said before, everyone has to agree. And right now, if you're the ACC, if you're the Big 12, hell, if you're the Mountain West, like Boise State, why would you agree to this? You get more money, you get more favorable, like you're bypassing round number 1, so you elongate your season. I don't see why it makes any sense for them to say, like, yeah, let's just wave the white flag on that last bit of power we have, and let's just say the top 4 teams are going to get buys because, right, Boise State, SMU, hell, probably most likely in most years the Big 12 and the Big 12 and the ACC champions are not finding themselves in the top 4 most likely most years.
Mm-hmm.
It's the last bit of power they got. You said it to start here, and I'll just kind of finish up with this. I agree. Mm-hmm. I think we should see changes and just have the top 4 teams get buys. I don't think we will see any changes for 2025 when it's all said and done. I think we're going to see a very similar format.
I want to try to keep this relatively short because I think we could talk in circles about this for hours, and we've kind of discussed this ad nauseum throughout the playoff, through the postseason, once it ended. Obviously the next step then is 2026. Where should it go? Instead of like, what's going to happen? We kind of know, I think, what's going to happen. The Big Ten of the SEC, with the power they have, are going to make it as beneficial as possible for each of those conferences to maximize the college football playoff. It's going to be 4 auto bids. The Big 12 and ACC are going to get 2, group of 5, 1, Notre Dame maybe. And then depending on how many, whether it's 14 or 16, the rest are going to be at large, and it's probably going to be another Big Ten and another SEC team in that group. If that is assumed as to what's going to happen, what do you think the ideal model for a college football playoff is moving forward, with the understanding of expansion is inevitable at this point?
I think at this point, here's what I would do. I would go to 16. I'd wipe away conference championship weekend. I would play the regular season. That's it. You play 12 games and let's get the playoff going here, because I think number one, again, when you look at the playoff schedule, you're going against other, and like the one thing I did not like this year with the schedule was the fact that you had 3 playoff games sandwiched between 2 NFL games. Right? No matter what the matchup is, you're going to have the NFL win. I think the college football playoff, because there's so much lead up into it, deserves a weekend to themselves. And later in the year, right around Christmas time, is when the NFL starts to creep into Saturdays. I think if you take a weekend out and just eliminate conference championship weekend and say, okay, if we're going to go to 16, we're going to still try to make the regular season mean something by saying you only get 12 games. You can't back your way into the conference title game. You're going to get 12 games, and that's it. We're going to give you the top 16 teams. The auto bids, I think, are awful for every conference. But if that's going to be part of the deal here, then I think at least eliminating conference championship weekend and trying to make the regular season a little bit more important, because I do think these auto bids wipe away and chip away some of what makes college football the best, which is the regular season being very important. I'll go 16 teams, no conference championship weekend. How about you? How about yourself, Trip? What are you thinking?
Well, my concern is, as you expand, like, you can't really see this thing go into February. And I'm with you, where if you can play meaningful college football games that first weekend of December, and then maybe again in the second weekend of December, and then ultimately you kind of scale back the playoffs a week where it's earlier, and your semifinals are on New Year's Eve or New Year's Day, and then your championships the week after. I'd love to see that. I think that's what's best for the sport. I don't think that's where it's heading. I will say I'm actually really intrigued by the conference championship, that model of 1 versus 2, 3 versus 4, 5 versus 6, particularly in leagues like the Big Ten and the SEC. My concern would be outside of, number one, facilities. Like, can you bring even a town like Indy, which is a great host city for championships, love it or hate it, it is. Can you have 6 teams at the stadium facility, hotels, lodging, turnaround? Like, it almost feels like those have to be at different locations or at home sites.
Please.
Yeah. But
Please.
outside of 1 versus 2 playing for a Big Ten or an SEC championship, what do those, like the 3-4 game, if both teams are already guaranteed a spot in the playoff, what's that game really playing for? Nothing, right? Like, I think this year, I know you talked about devaluing the regular season. I thought this year was still pretty good. Like, more teams were in contention. 25, 30 teams were in contention into November. Yeah, sure, it devalued that Texas-Georgia game or that Ohio State-Penn State game, but that game still had meaning, especially if you have to play, like, going into next year, and we'll talk about it with some teams like Wisconsin, right? Wisconsin going to next year, I think, has Oregon, Michigan, Ohio State, and Alabama all on their schedule. Well, don't tell me those games don't mean anything, because they have to win 2 of them to have any. And I'm not saying Wisconsin's a playoff, but I'm saying if Wisconsin was a playoff caliber team, they'd probably have to win at least 2 of those 4 to make a playoff run. Like, even Penn State this year, we know what their schedule was, right? You felt like they had to go and win the rest of their games because they didn't have that second opportunity in the regular season to prove themselves. Ohio State couldn't go 0-4 against Oregon, Penn State, and Michigan. They
even Indiana too. They played 4, those 3 top 10 teams. Like, they had to win at least 2 of them, which they did.
So I still think there was enough meaning in the regular season. I do worry about that as it expands to 16. My whole thing on that conference championship is just, what are the stakes of those games? If you want to do an expanded conference championship weekend, 1 versus 2, winner wins your conference. 3 versus 6, 4 versus 5. The winner of the 3-6 game and the winner of the 4-5 game goes to the college football playoff and gets one of your top 4 spots in the auto bids. Now, maybe that's how you add importance to it. But I think that just ultimately draws out what is already a long season.
Do you like that?
I would love to not see this thing expand. I would love to see it stay at 12. I really would, but I know that's not happening. And I'm with you. I don't love the auto bids, but we're going to get them. Yeah. I don't know. I know our next question is like, I don't want to say it's ruining the sport, right? Because the NFL ultimately used to have this model of before the salary, I was just reading an interesting thread on this morning on X. A thread about how the NFL model before they introduced the salary cap, and everyone was opposed to salary cap, right? Owners, players, everyone, fans, no one wanted it. But the same teams were winning all the championships. Packers, 49ers, Dallas, Pittsburgh, the teams where they invested a lot of money in their franchises. This is kind of like Major League Baseball. You know who's going to be good, who's not. With the money that schools now all will have to spend, albeit at their discretion, and with 4 auto bids, you do wonder if there's more parity coming in college football that could make it a better product. Or is it still going to be the haves or have-nots? My inclination would still be the haves or have-nots, because those schools are going to find additional revenue to support their teams and have the resources available. Because it's not just about the players, who are a huge part of it. Coaches' salaries, that's still coming out of a different pot. But I do wonder if there could be more parity coming for the sport. I just think college football as we know it has already changed significantly, and I think it's going to continue to change. But if you look how powerful the NFL is, where the regular season certainly doesn't have as much value as it does in college football, but the playoffs, the Super Bowl, the TV ratings, if college football is more like the NFL, yeah, we have to recalibrate our minds, how we view it, how we judge it. But is that entirely a bad thing? Because NFL ratings and playoffs and stakes of those games, that would tell you otherwise. Even though we're kind of trained as college football supporters, advocates, people who love the sport for the way it's been, even though we've kind of been trained to say, yes, this is all bad for the sport. And my first inclination is to say, yes, it is all bad for the sport, right? And I know you're the same way. I know you feel exactly the same. But if you look at the NFL, which is the most powerful sports product in North America, well, if college football is more like the NFL and it's 2 super leagues, a Big Ten and an SEC, look at the success of the NFL. Is it truly a bad thing? And that's kind of the devil's advocate point of view, but it really does make you think.
I think a few things. Number one, I like college football. I think what makes it so popular and different is the fact that it's not the NFL, right? Like it's almost kind of the opposite, where the regular season is kind of the Super Bowl and the 14 playoff, the 12 team. Like, I think it's still important, but like for so much of college football's existence, it was all about September, October, November. And then how you crown a champion going from there was like almost second fold. I do think preserving what made college football so special and what drew so many people in, which were those 3 months of just pure chaos where you lose a game and it feels like your season is over. Mm-hmm. I do think preserving that as much as possible is still important. Mm-hmm. And to your point, we said before, I would agree. I think the 12-team playoff made the regular season more important and better. So I don't think like playoff expansion right away is the devil to ruining the regular season. I think it's the auto bids, honestly. Now, that to me is my biggest issue with everything being talked about with the future. I don't love a system that no matter what your conferences look like, no matter who's coming back, no matter what the injury situation is, whether it's 14 or 16, you are guaranteeing before even a practice happens that a majority or at worst half of the playoff field is filled with 8 teams from 2 conferences. I just don't like that because I think it takes away the competition.
And my viewpoint, and the point I was trying to make, and it's a very simplistic viewpoint that doesn't acknowledge what truly makes college football special. Mine was truly like a business. You got 32 teams like you do in the NFL, albeit the NFL teams are in Philadelphia, Los Angeles, Dallas, and major markets,
York,
Houston,
Chicago,
New York City.
Right.
Like, sorry, but Tuscaloosa State College, Birmingham, like these aren't those markets. Even Austin, like these aren't those markets. What makes college football special is the connection to your school, the pageantry, the tradition, the history, the reliving your memories of a college town. Like I know that it's never going to be on that NFL level. I'm not trying to make it. I'm talking purely from a business, like simplistic business perspective. If you had essentially 32 franchises, which is what you essentially would have with the Big Ten and the SEC, why not to like completely just dismiss the idea? without truly acknowledging what makes the sport special. And it's, going back to Ann Arbor and going to a game at Michigan and going to Skeeps on a Friday night. And then you're going to go to the Pretzel Bell after the game, going to Happy Valley, and you're going to the first on Friday night for the first happy hour, and you have the cowbell and you're out. Like, that's what makes college sports, college football really cool and really special. And the tailgate, like the whole thing around it. So I'm not trying to dismiss that. The point I'm trying to make from a business perspective and a simplistic perspective, especially when TV executives and networks have all the power here and conference commissioners and everyone's greedy that's sitting at those tables, and you need to be greedy because how can you fund, players that now are paid? How can you fund the sport to make it successful? It's just changed so much. Like, there's so many dynamics at play, and to hear athletic directors and conference commissioners and all the people who are stakeholders in this discuss it time after time, it's such a complicated issue. We can't just sit here and say, well, a 12-team playoff or a 14-team playoff or a 16-team playoff, this is what's best for the sport. Because ultimately, the Big Ten has different goals and the SEC have different goals, and the ACC, wasn't there that conversation the other day that the ACC and the Big East could combine for basketball? Could you imagine that?
Mm-hmm.
Like, college sports as we know it are over. So it's time, as much as we want to hold onto everything we hold near and dear to our hearts about college sports, when the NCAA was an all-powerful governing agency back to 15 years ago, and March Madness was what it was, and the Big East basketball tournament at the Garden was what it was, and there was a Pac-12, and teams on the West Coast weren't in a Midwest conference, the Big Ten, and the ACC was truly the Atlantic Coastal Conference. We got to throw all that out. As much as we want that to still be true, it's not. So that's why I think it's hard to discuss these issues, not as people who cover the sport and are around the teams. And like, you and I certainly aren't as plugged in as most, but we kind of have an idea of what's going on. But we're talking about it as fans here on this podcast. And how we know it as fans, we can't cling to that. We can't latch to that. And that's what makes these conversations that much more difficult, because our college football fandom has been passed by the executive commissioners. They're looking at, how do we guide this for 10, 15, 20, 30 years from now? And this is even like evolving past the lawsuit and the contract and the unionization and whatever may come of college sports. That's where their focus is. And I think it's hard to look at it through that lens. And I hate looking at it through that lens. I like, that's wrong to me. I hate it. And I'm not trying to, like, it's really easy to sit here, but I'm just trying to throw different ideas out there, because I think that's the way we have to approach it with that perspective now. And it sucks.
It does. Speaking of ideas, you said a word before that I think is maybe worrisome to some, but I think could be the answer here going forward. You said SuperLeague. I would think I would be for a SuperLeague in the sense of, like, when you look at what the playoff will be, right? We don't know it's going to be 14 or 16 teams. It's expanding, no doubt about it. Auto bids are coming for the Big Ten and the SEC, because the Big Ten and the SEC have control. They are going to dictate the terms of the playoff to everybody else. So you're going to see, again, more revenue coming into these two conferences, more champions out of the, like, everything is going to skew the next 5-10 years towards the Big Ten and the SEC.
Mm-hmm.
I think so. I just don't think college football overall, and this is including business as well, not just like, what we used to have it as fans and what we loved. I think the business of college football, I don't think it's in its best interest to basically go all in on the Big Ten and the SEC and basically alienate everybody else, which is essentially what you're doing with how the formats are and the money discrepancies as well. I think if we're talking SuperLeague here and you're talking the top, let's just call it 50, 60 schools, basically the Power Four, and you have you break away and you create now your own league and your own championship, and maybe have somebody run it. And it's easier to run a SuperLeague when it's 50 schools, kind of, let's say, pretty close financially, right? That at least are trying to compete for the same thing. You don't have Akrons of the world, no disrespect, and Buffaloes of the world there.
With a commissioner.
Right, with a commissioner, where you have 50, 60 schools on a somewhat even playing field, and you can sell it to kind of what you said. If you sell like the NFL, where the TV rights for the most part are the same, and you're not selling the Big Ten to Fox, and you're not selling the SEC to ESPN, but you're selling this Super League here. If you want to broadcast Alabama and Penn State and Michigan and Ohio State and Wisconsin, well, you got to buy into our Super League, and everyone's getting the same amount of money roughly. I think it could bring parity. I think like when you talk about the NFLization of college football, I think if we're talking Super League here of the Power 4 schools for the most part, and maybe a few others as well, 60, 65, whatever it may be, and you can sell it the way the NFL sells their product as you're buying the NFL, I think you can get the best of both worlds where you can have parity, you can have the top dog still playing, you can get your money, but also maybe kind of also at the same time kind of go back a little bit to traditional college football. How do you feel about a Super League? How do you feel about that idea?
That's probably inevitable, but how does it translate across sports? And like, man, I don't love it.
Have to be football only. I would say, I think if you create a Super League, I think it'd have to be football only.
So is football, I mean, again, we can talk in circles for hours here. Is football its own entity? Like then, so what happens to the rest of the college athletic department? Again, I think there's way too many dynamics at play. I think a commissioner to oversee football, but keep it kind of aligned as is would be great.
It's tough.
It's really hard.
We could talk hours, days, and weeks about this because there is no answer. There's a million different directions that they can go. And there's right now, because nobody's in control. I mean, really the Big Ten and the SEC are, but again, they even have their own interests deep down and they may not align totally. Like it's just right now, directional is kind of going all over the place and trying to pick up the pieces of what's best for everybody is extremely difficult. One thing I will say, because this did come out in the reporting, I think could be good for college football fans, kind of going back to the regular season and the importance of big games. One thing talked about here in the 2026 and beyond playoff format, outside of the 14 or 16 teams and the auto bids, was also a thought of a scheduling alliance trip between the Big Ten and the SEC, where they would have every year, one game. Now, we'll see how they pick the opponents, but like basically you are mandated one game every year to play against, the conferences pitting against themselves, each other. I think it's great. Like if that comes to fruition, I think that is one of those changes that's good. I think you put better games on the schedule for fans and take away, Buffalo State. Like, I think it's good.
I think the most important thing that I read, while I agree with that, but it'll be interesting. Like, I guess if you have auto bids, you feel safe, but like, are you going to put Penn State, LSU, or an Ohio State, Texas against each other? Or, and no knock to what they did this year, or, hey, let's make sure Ohio State gets as many wins as possible. We're going to put them against Vandy. We're going to put them against Mizzou. That maybe it's just a true rotation of teams, which is probably the best, most fair, and most appealing way for fans to do it. The thing I read, though, that's most important, and I'm all about this, is both conferences would play 9 conference games.
Agreed. Which is, again, is another thing, another added layer. The fact that the mightiest conference plays one extra cupcake and not a conference game, like that's all. Yeah. Again, there's so much here. But that's the one thing about the auto bids that could be a benefit. If you're going to just go the top 4 standing in the Big Ten, top 4 standing in the SEC, then those non-conference games don't mean as much, right? Because they don't impact your Big Ten or SEC conference standing. So hopefully that makes it easier to avoid, Ohio State, Vanderbilt, and instead you get Ohio State and Georgia and Michigan and Alabama and Penn State, LSU, and give the opportunity for those fans to travel. Like, I'm jealous of Wisconsin fans. I'm sure you're not excited playing Alabama, but to go to Tuscaloosa, I think is awesome. Like, to get that opportunity, I think is cool compared to kind of what we saw with Nebraska when they canceled their series last week against Tennessee because their renovations to the stadium, they want an extra home game for the revenue. I was like, that sucks. Like stuff like that, I think hurts college football fans. And you take away what was a marquee opponent coming in Tennessee in 2026. You take away a road trip opportunity to go to Knoxville in 2027. Again, all because of revenue, because you're going to have less people in the stands. So we can't have 7 home games. You've got to have 8 because we're not going to have 20,000 people in the stands. So how are we going to make that up? It sucks. Like kind of going back to what you said here, I guess to put a bow on it, the fact that money, and I get it, right? That's what makes the world go round. It's reality.
A temporary bow. a temporary bow on
That's
this.
true.
It's only
Bow.
temporary.
Fair. The fact that money has infiltrated college football to the point of everything is decided by a few TV execs and a few ADs that look at the bottom dollar first and foremost sucks. I think we can all agree on that. You can talk about the direction of the sport. The fact that money is the main driver, I get its reality, but it sucks for the sport. It sucks for fans because I think they're the ones at the end that are hurt the most by this, because what's good for the bottom dollar is not mostly not good for the fans. That's what sucks. Let me give you some power here, Trip, to actually put a real bow on this. Let's say tomorrow you're named college football commissioner. You can make one rule change. What do you got? How are we fixing the sport? King Trip here.
Well, I think you named it in the question there. You're commissioner. Like, you need someone to oversee the sport.
That's fair. So you'd appoint yourself. It's like, what's like if you get a genie, you rub the bottle, get one wish. Okay, wish for 1,000 wishes. Boom, you gain the system.
I don't know that that's a good idea. I did love the suggestion of Nick Saban. I really did.
I think he's no nonsense. I think he would kind of see what's best for the sport. I'll go back to non-conference games. To mandate some better games. That's the one that bothers me. But that's, again, drop in the bucket, I guess, if you will, compared to the other problems right now college football is dealing with.
Hold on. That temporary bow was a lot more temporary than I thought. I wasn't expecting you to throw another question at me there.
Sorry. Well, I got to keep you on your toes. It's been a while.
For our YouTube audience, we have to watch what time we record at. Your lighting doing a little later today because that's my class. Wow. The shadows, and it's not just the 5 o'clock shadow.
It's like baseball. I even got to watch out for the pitchers halfway in the shadow.
No. It's like playing a football game at Jerry World.
Oh, blinded by the light. Thank God you're not throwing me any passes. This is nice. 50 degrees, sun's out, spring's here, baby. Let's go.
Well, at least for a day or two. Hey, let's wrap this thing up. How do you want to wrap this up today? You want to talk USC?
Let's talk USC football, Trip. Are you believing or not? Because what the Trojans have done recently here is exciting if you're a USC fan. Right now, currently, it is February 26th. I forget the date, whatever. December 8th, in that range, right, is when the early signing day is and when most high school recruits sign. So we have almost a calendar year to go here. But for next year, USC currently, according to 24/7 Sports, has the number one recruiting class in the country, highlighted by 2 top 150 prospects they were able to land over the weekend. Is this real? Are you starting to buy with the changes made to the front office and bringing in Chad Bowden from Notre Dame, amongst other moves that USC made? It's still early, but you're seeing some maybe rewards already for USC. Are you starting to buy what the Trojans are doing, or is it still kind of, let's wait and see a little bit? Long way to go.
Well, I don't know that. For me, it's a little bit different than I think your opinion is going to be, because yes, I do feel like the moves have really bolstered and helped USC in a direction for where they want to go with their player personnel and recruiting. I have always held the stance, even though you haven't, that the allure of USC has not been lost to the extent that you've kind of assumed it has been. So I think it is real. I think it's interesting to see where it goes. I know it goes hand in hand with some of the moves that they've made, but I don't think it's as extreme a leap as I feel like you probably believe.
I mean, the thing that's tough is this, and I thought Antonio Morales, who came on the pod a few weeks ago, does a great job covering USC for The Athletic. He kind of pointed this out, because this is not the first time USC's kind of had this, let's say, spring fling, if you will, of getting highly ranked prospects. Just go back to this time last year. They landed 3 top 100 commits and were kind of top 5, top 6 this time last year in recruiting rankings. They fell to 14th, and those top 3 guys I told you about all decommitted and all did not go to USC. So there's so much still to go. But why I'm actually with you here, why I'm believing that what we're seeing from USC is real, is partly because of the changes, right? They bring in the front office. You get some guys that know what they're doing and have success. That's different. I think that's tangible. The other thing, though, Trip, of what they've changed, I think it really helps. They've changed their recruiting approach. They try to be national. Right? They try to go into Texas and get guys to go to USC over Texas. They try to go to Georgia and get guys to go away from the Dogs and come to the Trojans on the other side of the country. What they're doing, though, with this year's class so far is putting a fence around California and trying to recruit the guys in their own backyard. California has so much talent. We've talked about it for years. We had Greg Smith on of Rivals, and we're talking about, is this sustainable for USC to basically have this national recruiting approach? He said, no. You have so much talent in your backyard, and what we're seeing already is USC starting to get that talent in the backyard to come home. They already have, again, long way to go, lock and change, but already they have 7 guys committed for 2026 from California. Trip, they had 5 in their class in totality in 2025. Alabama had more players from California than USC did last year. I'm with you. I'm buying it's real because there seems to be a true change in their approach of how they recruit, and they are now going closer to home and prioritizing those guys first than trying to go into some of these other talent-rich states and trying to outbid and out-recruit some gigantic in-state juggernauts like Texas, Florida, Georgia, etc.
Lincoln Riley, not the only guy putting a fence up in Southern California in 2025.
Look at you, Mr. Politics over here. Starting with vaccine talk, ending with some fence talk. Man, Brian Tripp, give this guy a week off, and he is now CNN.
When you were at home with the flu, what was your screen time daily?
Oh, God, so bad. So bad.
I'm just getting topic after topic pushed out to me. I'm like, oh, he's definitely just sitting around and scrolling social looking for something to do.
Not proud of it. Yeah. TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, just sitting there mindlessly. Daytime TV, I mean, not that it's a surprise, but boy, oh boy, it sucks.
Yeah.
And I really should have used that time to watch more movies. I watched I, Tonya, which was a good movie.
What's that about?
What? Tonya Harding?
Okay. Yeah.
Kind of her life story, if you will. And, she gives her perspective. Margot Robbie played a great Tonya Harding. I have watched like no movies. I'm very uncultured. I definitely, looking back, regret how I used 3 days on the couch of basically watching one movie and scrolling mindlessly for hours on end. I probably not proud, but yeah, I'm not even going to look at the screen time because it is a number that I'm not going to like, to say the least. But it's good to be back. It's good to be back. It's good to be back having some screen time, Trip, with you.
Same.
That is what's most important here. So thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. Thank you for joining us here on the Still Enrolled Pod. As a reminder, make sure you subscribe on YouTube and also wherever you do get your pods for just the next few weeks here. As things kind of slow down, we're going to do mostly one pod a week. Breaking news happens. We'll be here as well, but mostly one pod a week. So kind of keep an eyes and ears out for that. Like Tripp said, we have a lot. Forget about the direction of college football. We got a lot to talk about with the direction of spring football, which is coming up here rapidly for a lot of schools. We'll break that down as well. So there's no offseason in college football. We appreciate you tuning us here on the Still Enrolled Podcast, and we'll talk to you next week right here on the pod.